Hello and welcome. It's time for another year of the Foundation of Digital Games Conference, and with it, alongside it, of course, is FDG TV. They're bringing us back for a third time. Third season usually means we get over all the kinks of the second season, and then we really hit our stride once again. The first season, everybody loves it. Second season, sometimes not so much, but the third season, back once again, hitting our stride. I am your host for this wonderful experiment, for lack of a better term. I am Tommy Thompson, largely known as the voice of AI in games, although it was written in our production notes that I am Scotland's answer to Dr. Brian Cox, which, funnily enough, I would have thought the actor, Brian Cox, from Scotland, would have been Scotland's answer to Brian Cox, but never mind. Joining me, of course, is my wonderful co-host, Anne Sullivan, who, according to our documentation, is a level 12 games research druid.
Hi, everyone.
How are we doing?
Yes, and I'm here with my druid familiar, Kaylee. Zoe may join us later, but for now, it'll just be us two.
All important. We've got the cat. The cat's back,
Yes.
which is the most critical part, because if without the cats, what are we even doing?
Pretty much.
We didn't get cat cam sorted out for this year. Wasn't the whole plan that we were going to have a dedicated camera just for the cat?
There's still time. Also, I think for this season, probably the most important question that everybody has on their mind from last season is, Tommy, have you tried any new biscuits in the last 12 months?
Several. Many might even say. We're still largely doing this remotely, so I've had the opportunity to eat lots of biscuits, but I'm also very conscious that we have a very limited amount of time, and I could easily take up the whole time just talking about biscuits when we have all these wonderful guests who are going to come and hang out with us.
That's true. Maybe we can get like a daily dose.
We'll get there.
Okay. Great.
We'll buy some biscuits, actually, after we record this episode. Actually, in the meantime, Anne, I think it's important to remind everyone, what is the point of FDG TV?
That is an excellent question, Tommy. So the point of FDG TV is that we want to be able to engage with the community and try to build a sense of social interaction, even though there is some virtual elements continuing with this year's FDG. And we think it's a nice way to highlight some of the papers that people might be interested in and get a chance to talk to people at FDG, even though not everyone can go there.
Well, indeed, because FDG is back in person this year,
Yes.
but it's still maintaining a hybrid vibe. So we're here to join you from wherever you are. Maybe you're actually live over in Greece, or you may be live somewhere else. That implied that you weren't live somewhere else, which is... You know what? We're not even going to cut that out. I'm going to keep that in. I think that was great. So this year, the conference theme is Games as Culture and Communication. And we've got a bunch of really interesting speakers coming in to talk about some of the papers that they're working on. And of course, we also have the wonderful Best Paper Watch. Mike is back once again to talk about some of the best papers that he has found. And we know that for many of you, that's really what you're actually here for. Because I think he really set the tone, I think, in last year with Best Paper Watch. But sadly, I think he's really outdone himself this year. We don't actually know because we haven't seen them yet, but I'm sure they're going to be great.
Definitely better than last year.
Absolutely. We think.
Yes.
We hope.
We're pretty sure.
Convenient cut segue. Anne, what's happening at the conference this year? What are the things people should be keeping an eye out for?
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of stellar keynotes. Christine Jorgensen and Konstantinos Dimopoulos will be giving two of the keynotes. We also have a number of workshops. Looks like 5, 6. Went on to the next page. We've got the 13th procedural content generation workshop.
Oh, unlucky.
And I think that's lucky. Maybe as long as FDG. Developing digital games in and for academic contexts. User experience of artificial intelligence in games. Games in the metaverse. Gameplay design patterns. And of course, most importantly, 4th workshop on tabletop games. And I'm just saying that because our production producer, there we go, there's the word, our producer is running that one. And just a quick note that FDG is sponsored this year by Microsoft. So thank you.
And we've just been told that we're going to cut all of this out. Well, actually, I get to decide that because it's me that does all the cutting anyway. So
yeah,
we'll cut it out.
He doesn't want to be called a producer? I don't understand.
Off to a wonderful start. As acknowledged, I think, particularly we're doing this setup where, as always, we're trying to present this for you, put it out to yourselves for y'all to enjoy. We're also, given the nature of the team and the fact that we're kind of all over the world, so this is being all recorded in advance of the conference. So if you are watching this when it is live published over on YouTube, please don't be disappointed if we don't react to you directly for all of the wonderful comments and constructive criticisms that you provide for the show, because we're probably not there. Actually, some of us will probably be hanging out in the chat, but we're not going to react to it directly in the video itself because we're not around. But I did, for the purposes of the audience, put the honks back in, and you can't hear, but they will be there in post. All right, let's get on to our first guest, shall we? Let's get into it. So I'm going to jump over here. And then, of course, this is all part of our immaculate production. Don't you forget that as part of this, what we're going to do is we have a bunch of guests that are going to come in and talk about some of the work that they're involved in, papers that they've published, and other kind of just general cool activities that we want you to find out about. And then, of course, you can find out more about it at the conference itself. So, without further ado, let us welcome our first guest for FDG TV 2022. Yeah, it's 2022. Time has no meaning. I'd completely forgotten. So let's give a warm welcome to Aleena Chia from Goldsmiths University of London. And of course, we'll have the obligatory applause.
Hi, Anne. Hi, Tommy. Great to be here.
Hi, Aleena. Thanks for joining us. So just to give everybody a quick summary of what you're going to be doing at FDG, Aleena is part of a panel that explores issues of scale and procedural content generation. And my understanding is that your panel wants to focus on the implications of large-scale generation for game aesthetics and research, player experience, and labor justice. So I was just curious, can you tell us more about what your research tackles in broad strokes?
Sure. Maybe, I can start with the panel first. So, it's about ideologies of scale. So ways of thinking and working with scale in PCG. So we're all kind of used to efficiency, right? In AAA production context, right? How PCG is one of many scalable art solutions. And the idea here is to generate vast swathes of virtual environments without having to model these individual units. And key thinkers in humanities, who work on scale, they kind of look at it as the scalability of labor. So, the division of labor, all the way from the assembly line to the game production pipeline. All of this is at the heart, it's at the foundation of capitalism. The idea here is to keep making things more modular, whether it is, for example, the logistics of a shipping container, or whether it's a game engine. Once you make it modular, it's much easier to sort of make that labor scalable. So my research comes from, I look at discourses of AAA game production. So specifically, I'm looking at the discourses within GDC talks, and looking at how GDC developers, as a kind of public, but also industry discourse, how they talk about it. So obviously, there are limitations there about how they talk about scale and how they talk about labor, and PCG. So the idea here is that if people in the humanities, if they think about scale as kind of, doing the same thing without resetting the basic framework, what does that mean for artistic practices, right? What does it mean to keep following that basic framework without resetting it, without, changing it up? Does it lead to a kind of conservatism, when it comes to the artistic practice? And does it also lead to certain kinds of implications for diversity, of labor, but also diversity of content? So that's what I'm interested in with my research. And I'm super excited to engage with, designers and practitioners. So, we have folks like Mark R. Johnson, who is a researcher, but also, a designer. And we have other folks like Paolo Rufino, who's a researcher, Mike Cook, whom you know, and Charlene Putney, who's an artist. So really excited to hear, outside of the AAA context, what is it like? But also inside of the AAA context, perhaps, what's actually going on beyond what the devs are saying on stage.
Yeah,
that sounds really exciting.
Yes,
Go ahead,
it is. I was quite jazzed about this as someone who's done research on PCG in the academic spaces, but also subsequently doing working on PCG systems in game development. And one of the things, particularly as you said there, like you've got this different makeup of different people, and as a result, you're also looking at the demographics of people, both the types of people involved and the roles that they have within game production pipelines, and how their work is being impacted by being assimilated into a procedural generation development pipeline. Could you talk a little bit more about this, about how your perception of different people's roles and responsibilities within that framework might be affected?
Right. Okay. So, we all in this virtual room, we all know that game development, especially in the AAA context, is extremely stratified, right, by discipline, right? Folks that are working in art, folks that are working in testing, there's different levels of prestige, and there's also different levels of, how mobile you are within the industry, how precarious you are, and so on. So all that, right, is being exacerbated by the PCG pipeline, right, in a way, because of the fact that the PCG pipeline kind of modularizes things more, but it gives a lot more power to tool developers, right? And once a tool is fixed, whether it's within a game engine or whether it's, in a separate software a platform, all of that gets decided sort of at the beginning. So technical artists have a lot of power in that context. And somehow, it seems to be that the creative practices, right, they are downstream, right? So when you have to tweak something at the end of a procedural generation process, or when you have to clean things up at the end, right, what I'm concerned with is suddenly that labor is no longer artistic or creative. It becomes kind of mechanical, right? And that stratification that is already in place from programmer, all the way down to someone who works on, for example, localization, or art, all of that just becomes even more devalued, right? We already know that within the AAA context, there is ideation and then there's execution, right? What is PCG doing to that? It's making it even more, sort of mechanical, and what was creative. I mean, obviously it's constantly changing even before PCG, but now it's changing in a way that we can see, researchers can see, of course, developers can see, and for folks that are interested in, equitable, work within the games industry, especially when it comes to diversity, gotta look at what's happening and perhaps start talking about ways in which it can be, in a way, if not completely stopped, at least ameliorated in different ways. So yeah, I mean, and part of what led me to this was the comparison between scalable art solutions, devs, even within this sort of professional stage, context. We're talking about PCG and outsourcing in the same breath. So there's this idea, just automate it away, just outsource it away, execution and ideation became very clear cut in that sort of pipeline. And of course, this is the AAA context. It differs, in indie context, even though scale is still relevant. So I'm super excited to hear how scale plays out, in terms of smaller teams within indie context from my collaborators in the panel.
Well, speaking of smaller teams, do you think that there is less of that stratification, or do you think that the way that indie developers use algorithmic generation is different, especially in the way in terms of motivation of why they would use it and how they use it.
Right. Okay. So let me take a stab at this. It's not my exact area of expertise. So, I'm going out on a limb and, you guys, please, like jump in at any point. Right. So when you're smaller teams, obviously people have to multitask. They have to, they have to be proficient in different disciplines, right? They can't just do one thing, they have to sort of have their hands in different aspects of production. So the division of labor in smaller teams, it tends to be a bit more fluid, tends to be a bit more flexible. And also, the sort of goals are not always about the bottom line, right? In indie development, of course, this is a vast overgeneralization, but just to give you a few examples, Tanya Short in a 2015 talk, right, was thinking about how the procedural generation of maps, but also of like environments. Like you can have a lot of it, but if it doesn't mean anything, if it doesn't, it's not meaningful to the player, if it doesn't add to the experience, more doesn't mean better, right? Faster or more efficient doesn't mean better. So within smaller teams, it's easier for the team to pivot towards the thing that is meaningful. Whereas when you're in a large organization, every team leader, they have their own mandate, right? And they're not in complete control of the situation. They're not in complete control of the if not the mission, then the goal of the project in that sense. And another sort of like academic example, from research that I can bring your attention to perhaps is the work of Canadian game scholars, Jennifer Whitson, Parker and Bart Simon, Phelan Parker and Bart Simon, and they discussed how like within the indie context, at least in Canada, like the goal wasn't more money. The goal was like to sustain the practice of doing the thing with the people that you like doing it with, and that's something that's really different, right? You can't, this doesn't translate. So again, scale is important. Within a smaller group, you can sort of, work towards this. And of course, there are challenges, if, in terms of staying afloat and in terms of staying relevant, but it doesn't quite scale in the same way if you're working in like 100-person team. So those are the sort of things that come up, or those are the sort of contrasts between a smaller scale team and like a larger, organization.
Yeah, those are great points.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting, as you mentioned earlier, like dealing with larger AAA teams, you've got this kind of distribution of work that is being, delegated to different parts of the production pipeline of the studio makeup, and then subsequently some of that's going to be outsourced, or even it's now going to be automated. And I guess like how much do you feel that how similar, I guess, is the discussion around the discussion of automation and game development with a lot of the similar discourse I think that's happening right now around automation of art through these new, things like Disco Diffusion or DALL-E, the idea of like automating art using AI tools and pipelines. Do you feel there's a lot of similarity and overlap there?
Okay, yeah. So this is a tough question. It's as is a complicated response, because what tends to happen in the public discourse is that it tends to be like, is it or is it not? Are artists going to get fired or are they not? And of course, it's like, it's like really, it's a complex situation. It depends on like your job category. It depends on like your sector of deployment, and it also depends on like your personal expertise. If you have like, if you have STEAM expertise, like not only like science, technology, but also the art and design side of it, then you're more able to, to like apply and be relevant within these different context, right? So that's the first thing, right, about like future-proofing jobs, is that the studies that have been done on this are also predictive, right? And we all know the pitfalls of those kinds of studies that have been done, for example, by UK think tanks and stuff like that. So that's something to be concerned about. It's like, how is the question framed, from the beginning? And then a sort of, connected to that is that the automation in general and how it's linked. It's always linked rhetorically to job loss. has to do more with deindustrialization and has to do more with stagflation and economic trends more broadly than it has to do with technology. And it's easy to point a finger, oh, it's that technology that's doing it, or it's like this industry that's disrupting. But looking at the bigger picture, I think is a lot more useful. But again, I defer to people that I cite in my work for the broader economic trends on this.
Well, I think that already brings a lot more nuance than possibly the Twitter discourse that's happening around this. So I think that's great. So I guess that leads me to the question of, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future regarding procedural content generation and AI in the game industry, and why?
Wow. Okay. Pessimistic or optimistic? I mean, I think that's a really tough one. I think that, if folks like you are having this conversation, I think that's a good thing. I think overall, the games industry is not what it was 20 years ago, right? GDC, is talking about more, it's looking at diversity, it's looking at labor, equity, all these sorts of things are coming to the fore, right? And I think that is a positive thing. However, right, what you see with game engines and what you see with the so-called democratization of game development is that tools that, used to be, you could tinker with, or that you had the skills to tinker with, when you were trained to make tools and not just use tools, right? This could be artists, this could be, even programmers. I think that the transparency of the tools is really important to foster a more equitable future in terms of content, but also in terms of labor conditions in the games industry. Because when you cover that up, with and you sort of make the tool for doing PCG or other kinds of, of game development, once you cover it up and make it all shiny and, you become the user, then it's harder to question what's going on, so-called under the hood. That's something that, that I think about a lot. I'm at Goldsmiths, right? And I'm in the media department, but I talk to folks in, in computing and thinking about, artistic practice through tools, I think is something that we have to be especially alert about. So, when they train students and when we train students, it's always, don't just use the tools, but tinker with them, and remake them according to what, to what you want to do with this project, and not let the tools lead you. So I think that's something that's really important. And here there's a clear line between, folks that are more technically proficient and folks that, that identify more, with artistic processes. And of course, education has a lot to do with that. It's not so much about the task itself, right? But it's about the sort of hang-ups that people have that have to do, that are socialized based on gender, class, race, and so on, and ability and so on.
Well, I feel, first of all, this has already been quite exciting. We've not even actually got to the panel yet. I mean, this is us literally just getting to talking a little bit about a panel that you're going to have running at FDG. And I feel like we've already hit you with a number of maybe challenging questions, and we've had some really exciting answers, I think. I think you've done a fantastic job. So, Aleena, thank you very much for joining us. Just as a little reminder to everyone, this is going to be the Ideologies of Scale in Procedural Content Generation panel that's going to be at FDG on Tuesday, September 6th at 9 a.m, which at the conference's time, which is in Greece, which is GMT +3 or BST +2, depending on whatever time zone that you're operating on. But yeah, Aleena, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that the panel goes really well and you have a great time at the conference too.
Great. Thank you so much, Tommy and Anne.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Alrighty, fantastic. So there you go, everyone. That was Aleena Chia from Goldsmiths, University of London. And once again, Ideologies of Scale in Procedural Content Generation. Really excited for this one. I really enjoyed having a read through the paper as well in preparation for this chat. So next up on the docket, I should probably critically bring in darling co-star. Hello, Anne, you're back.
Yes.
I mean,
Keely is also back.
This is, of course, Keely. My bad. This isn't about us, though, this segment.
No.
So this time, so Best Paper Watch is back. Of course, our wonderful member of the production team, Mike Cook, has went out once again in hunt of some of the best papers. But this year, compared to last year, if you recall, he was out in the wilds of England, Wales, looking for some of the best papers. But this year he swapped his binoculars for a beret, I guess. He's exploring the artistic side of the best papers as he seeks to understand what artistry is involved in writing a truly great paper. And in this first episode, we'll find him in his natural habitat on a beach on the south coast of England.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another year of FDG and of course another year of Best Paper Watch. We've got a whole season of great papers to show you, and this year we're going to be looking at it from an artistic perspective. We're going to be looking at what goes into the art of a great paper. And I'm here once again on the south coast of England, in my favourite place right by the sea. We're going to be looking at two great papers in this episode to get us kicked off. Let's go have a look. Our first best paper today is Static Analysis for Automated Identification of Valid Game Actions During Crawling. And that's why I've come down to the beach to get some materials for a found object artwork. So the problem that the artist wanted to solve with this artwork that they've created here today is the question of how to test a game that you've never seen before. Now, typically when we approach game testing, we take someone who already knows a lot about the game to write down the kinds of actions that are available, to say what we want to test for. That's a bit like walking into your artist's studio and already knowing what's going to be there. All of the paints are laid out, you've already got the canvas ready. But the challenge that these artists have approached today is more like found object art. It's more like coming down to a beach and not being sure exactly what you're going to find. And when you come across code that you've never seen before, well, that's a lot harder to test. You might not always know exactly how to get the code to execute a particular line, what inputs to put in to make a certain crash occur. And so the system here uses static analysis to look at the game code itself and decide what kinds of inputs would be necessary to force these lines of code to execute. And it works even if the controls are remapped, so we replace them with something else. It works even if there are variables, so the exact value of the code is changing while we're playing the game. And they've proven that the system works by applying it to a bunch of open source Unity games too. And of course, like any good experiment, they also compared their approach to existing state-of-the-art approaches as well. And they found that their approach is not only just as good or even better in some cases, but it can also run in real time. It's very adaptable. It's got a lot of potential to become the technique to use in the future. So we've come down to the beach. We found some driftwood, some stones, a bunch of stuff that we weren't really ready for. And it's making me think of one other artwork that I'd like to tell you about next. Well, I'm back from the beach. I'm back in my temporary holiday apartment, and we've collected a bunch of really interesting stuff from the beach that we're now going to attempt to work into a little piece of our own, which makes it the perfect time for me to tell you about our second paper today. Ticket to the Mind, a mobile eye-tracking exploration of game media and cognitive function. The artists/authors behind it wanted to ask the question of how our brain behaves differently when we're playing the physical version of a game or a digital version of the same game. And they've chosen the very famous board game Ticket to Ride as the subject of their experiment. So that's going to be the subject of my artwork today as well. Now, in this experiment, they were interested in studying the effects of the digital and physical versions of Ticket to Ride on two key features of our brain: working memory and visual attention. Now, the authors hypothesized that there would be a difference in visual attention and working memory between the physical and digital versions of the game. But after their very carefully designed experiments, they found some really interesting and surprising, in some cases, results. The first is that there really wasn't much difference between the visual attention of players that were playing the physical version of Ticket to Ride and the digital version. Similarly, the difference in working memory was quite significant, which they did expect, but the effect was not expected. In actual fact, there was a higher working memory load when playing the digital version of Ticket to Ride than when playing the physical one. That meant that your brain was working harder when you were playing the computer game version. So like a lot of great artwork, this best paper makes us reflect on who we are as people and how our bodies and brains work, and in particular the mysterious and curious and surprising things that happen to our brains when we play physical and digital games. Well, that's all we've got time for this episode of Best Paper Watch. But I think we did learn something interesting today. I think we learned about the challenge of taking things that we've not seen before and trying to do something with them, trying to analyze or think or understand unseen things. And I think we also learned a little bit about the human brain and why it's so interesting and weird and fun to study. I hope you'll join me for the rest of the Best Paper Watches throughout this week. We'll learn more about some of the great research that's happened here at FDG so far. Until then, enjoy the conference, and I will see you in the next episode.
Mike, thank you for another wonderful episode of Best Paper Watch. It looks like you were having a lot of fun out there on the beach, collecting all those particular object art that you found that is representative of the papers that you're excited about. Now, I'm saying this entirely despite the fact I haven't actually seen it. This is us basing it entirely on the fact that in the production notes, Mike left me a hint as to what actually this episode was going to be about. So apologies to everyone in advance as always. We hope that this was the best and worst part of the entire experience. So moving on. We want to have our second interview segment of the day, and please join me in welcoming our next guest. We have Marcello Gómez-Maureira from Leiden University. I'm going to jump in. Hello and welcome.
Hi, Marcello. Welcome.
There we go. The applause is playing.
You guys.
You can't hear it, but the applause is playing. The obligatory honk for the community as well. I don't think anyone plays the Goose Game anymore, but we still use the honk. It's all good. It's all good. So, anyway, let's get on to the most important part. So, Marcello, you are co-author on one of the papers that is being presented at the Games Beyond Entertainment track on September 5th, called Academic Games, Mapping the Use of Video Games in Academic Contexts. In fact, this paper is an honourable mention in the Games Beyond Entertainment track, and it's about games used for academic contexts shaped by a purpose beyond entertainment and the involvement of stakeholders from research and education institutions. So that's already a lot to unpack, and I guess that was like really my first question for you was, could you give us a definition of academic games and how you're taking that idea moving forward as part of this research?
So it's actually quite simple. It's probably harder to describe in a paper than it's actually meant to be. I think as soon as you have an idea, once you start describing it, becomes more and more complicated. But I think in a nutshell, it's essentially just a high-level description of saying games that are created to function or be part of academia. Either they are created from academic institutions or they're used as part of academic institutions. And I think the basic point I'm trying to make with it is this, on some level you could say, well, they're serious games, that's it. But I think there's value in seeing in what ways are the games that are created within academia / for academia different and specific. And I think there's hopefully something to say and interest also to explore more. So
you sort of gave two types of academic games, those that are built in academia and those that are used by academia. And I'm curious if you have an idea for like an exemplar academic game that you would use as an example of the genre, or maybe two, given that there's kind of two different ways that academic games are used.
Yes, I don't think it's a very, very famous one. I have to shortly check what it's called again. Effective Pac-Man. So I like the idea of Effective Pac-Man a lot. It's a game. I'm not sure how many. It's basically also another game that you can now go out and say I'm going to buy Effective Pac-Man. But it's basically a Pac-Man that is made in a way to frustrate people, right? So it's a game that is modified in order to be as frustrating as possible. And maybe that's not something that people would say like, oh, I would make a game in a way to annoy people, but for research purposes, it's very useful because you have an interactive kind of environment where participants / players get to actually interact with something, and it's just designed in such a way to lead to a specific emotion, and that can be useful for a wide variety of situations. It could be for psychology research. It could be also just to see you need as a stimulus in order to make sure that everyone is annoyed at that moment and then we do something, for example. So I think there's, I wouldn't call it the perfect game for it. It's just an example because it's so simple, right? We know Pac-Man, or many people know Pac-Man, and it's just tweaking the rules a little bit to make it as frustrating as it can be.
I haven't actually played this. I need to go and hunt this down. Actually, it sounds strangely interesting to me.
The Dark Souls of Pac-Man.
But you can imagine it, right? Like it's you just need to tweak a little bit something to make sure that you hunt it a bit. Maybe they're faster than usual. And like, oh, that's not even possible. I can't even escape. That's unfair. I don't want to feel this way. But for certain academic purposes, it can be very useful.
Yeah, and that's kind of the crux of your paper, is you're really talking about the idea of knowledge generation or dissemination through the framework of these games. And one of the things in the paper was you then proposed 4 kind of categories of different contexts in which the games could be used. Was it for stimulus? I wrote them down: stimulus, intervention, incentive, and modeling. And could you talk us through some of the differences of these, and particularly on the idea of stimulus and games as intervention? Because for myself, I come from an AI background. And so the idea of creating a game for the purposes of training AI algorithms definitely fits within this space. But I noticed that there's a kind of I felt that there was a bit of an overlap between stimulus and intervention. You talk a little bit more about that.
So I have to fully admit, I feel, as maybe often is the case when people are doing research, would I say this is the best paper? Well, it has one, so it's a good. But I think it's a work in progress in many ways, because this is how far we got to kind of find definitions that I think are useful. And I think there definitely is some overlap that I'm not necessarily super happy with yet. I think that there's more thinking work to be done and more like synthesizing it. But the way how we see it, a stimulus game is something that you would say is much more short term. It's really not so much about the person. It's more like to create the measure that you want to measure. It's the player is necessary, but it's not really about the player as much. It's maybe to study the behavior of something in general. Versus intervention games are really, I think you can kind of think of therapy games, for example. So it's, of course, you want to create a measurable change, but it's not about measuring the change. It's about causing the change. It's something that is over long term, so repeated kind of exposure, you could say. That is the way kind of thinking about it. I think the biggest issue that the paper might also have is that it's really difficult, and my heart goes out to everyone who's working on very conceptual pieces of work, to find good labels. It's always true. It's in any case true, but it feels much more difficult than, for example, in programming. I think in this case, I wouldn't know if I don't know if these labels would necessarily have to stay that way.
But we have labels, and that's a good start.
Yes. Yeah. It's much easier to iterate than it is to create in the first place. So, yeah. Speaking of the labels being challenging, what was the most challenging part of developing the typology, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the labels, essentially. What I think for me personally, I can speak also for the colleagues that we worked with, we are, I think one of my colleagues, Max Sundown, who worked on this, he's much more used to also work on rather conceptual papers. This is how I would say it. I like working on the intersection between humanities and computer science, which is my home faculty, but it's difficult to engage in it. And I think this is one of I have very few papers that are theoretical only. I think most of my work is usually with an experiment attached. It's kind of the way how I like to think about things. And it's also the writing process is much more focused on this is what we did, this is what we measured, this is what we can say about it. And it's useful. But I also noticed you want to be able to talk about, in this case, academic games as a grouping, and coming up with or defining the structure, because I think the reason why also people might enjoy this paper is that on some level, many academics that work that are presenting FDG know what I mean when I talk about academic games, but it's so difficult to formulate in something that is that can be transported. That is, I'm reading it and I get it. And I'm not sure if it really got there. I think together with the work of more academics, or more developers together, it can be sharpened, it can be improved. In fact, that is one of the goals of the workshop that is also part of FDG, that is going into basically finding a better mapping of academic games. I hope with that together we find a way to make it better, because as much as I'm honored to hear the paper got an honorable mention, I think it is a work in progress, and that's also exciting, I hope. It is for me, at least.
Absolutely. And I think you kind of intimated this a little bit, and I think this is actually a really great way to bring our conversation to a close for now, is that in the paper you talk about, as part of your future direction, you want to include the stakeholders involved in the use of, who both in the creation of these academic games, but also those who subsequently apply them. And I guess, like, what have you gave some thought as to how you're going to approach this and kind of engage with researchers? Are you hoping to kind of increase the adoption of this terminology just to help better frame discussion? Ultimately, I guess, what's your hopes for, like, the next iteration of the academic games research, as it were?
So I think definitely workshop is part of that, and I would hope that I'm not necessarily a terms guy. I think it's useful. What I want to work towards is that, especially on the educational side, I'm personally a teacher of game developers and also of game researchers, and I think they're often together in the same classroom, and not necessarily everyone is deciding to be on the in between. But I think where academic games can shine is to figure out how we can professionalize it as a way of making games, which is to say, I want to make essentially a serious game that helps research in some way, and that needs bits from many different experiences. And I think I would love to get to a point where that is kind of widely understood as a specialization of serious games, you could say. So if there's EXA games, there's academic games. It's not that clean, because EXA games could be both, but it's difficult.
Well, fantastic. So I'm very excited for this. I think this is going to go down very well. Actually, a key point to make is that you were referring to the workshop that this is part of, and also subsequently the influence this is having. This is the Developing Digital Games in and for Academic Contexts workshop. So perfect fit for it. So once again, just as a reminder for everyone, this is going to be presented in the Games Beyond Entertainment track, the Academic Games, Mapping the Use of Video Games in Academic Contexts, on Monday, September 5th. Marcello, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a great conference.
Yeah,
thank you,
Marcello.
See you there. Cheers.
Alrighty. There we go, everyone. Another wonderful guest, hot off the press. We're doing great. We're doing great. We're just saying this out loud because this is the first time we've done this in a year. It's the first episode, so we're always feeling really ropey. But all our guests got to come in, and they looked like they had a good time. We didn't freak them out too much. They were able to answer the questions, which is also useful, because if we just give them horrible questions they can't answer them, then what are we even doing? And it looks like we're at a point where I guess this first episode is beginning to move very quickly to a close, at which point I should probably bring in my wonderful co-host once again, and plus Kat. Kaylee, sorry. I need to remember the cat's name. We should
Maybe we can just set up a second window or a third window for Kaylee.
You know what? I could probably do that. Like,
okay, cool.
We'll have it sorted for tomorrow. Actually, I'm not promising anything.
Yeah, we'll have it sorted for the next season.
Next season, that gives me a whole year to forget all about it until 2 days beforehand. And then you're like, Tommy, have you done the thing? And I'm like, no.
Make the graphic.
As just been said by our top production team, we'll be super prepared next season. We said that last year. And the year before. But the graphics have changed. Look, we're in this wonderful blue space, which, if you remember, if you were here last year.
It was not blue.
It was not blue.
Yeah, what color was it, Tommy, who is colorblind?
No, I'm not getting into this. You're the person that actually made the graphic. You should tell everybody what color it was.
It was fuchsia.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, our production team got the color wrong in the chat as well. So this is...
Well, magenta isn't too bad.
Anyway, so we should probably be moving this to a close because everyone will be desperate to get see past us. What's coming up tomorrow on FDG TV?
At FDG TV or at FDG?
Both, I guess. I mean, the conference is kind of secondary, but it's really about us. But yeah, I guess what's happening at the conference?
Okay, let's talk about what's happening at the conference. So tomorrow, Tuesday at FDG, we've got the Doctoral Consortium tomorrow.
Oh.
So that'll be Tuesday afternoon. Please remember to go and support newer PhD students who might be coming here for the first time. So that'll be really exciting to see what kind of research that they're working on. And also don't forget to catch Aleena's panel, who we talked to earlier today, and bright and early, 9 a.m. local. Yes.
Coffee at the ready. We'll be fine. It'll be great.
Yes. And then tomorrow at FDG TV, we've got an exciting lineup. We've got, we're going to be discussing queer games on itch.io and also value-driven games. And Mike will be back with his easel and pastels in Best Paper Watch. And please check out the Discord for this year's community challenge. So we will be repeating that this year, and we will be giving you prompts for things to photograph, which we will feature on an episode of FDG TV.
Okay, right, and we'll wrap it up for our first episode. I think we've done it. We managed to get through. We've only got a couple more to go. Anyway.
There's only a few things in all caps in the production chat, so I think we did okay.
And I think the worst bits none of you will ever see because I'll cut them out. Or
Blooper reel.
I'll be too lazy and I'm just going to keep them all in. All right. But yes, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you also to Aleena and Marcello for joining us as well as our wonderful guest today. Thank you, of course, to Mike for going out there and finding all the best papers. Thank you to Anne and Kaylee for being my wonderful co-hosts. And to all of you for tuning in and watching this episode of FDG TV. We will be back tomorrow with another wonderfully produced episode.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tommy.
Smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave.